Hey guys, today you will hear some creepy stories. Enjoy watching. Story 1. The Library That Never Closes. It all began on one of those heavy, rainy evenings when the streets feel emptier than usual. I was a college student, exhausted after a long day of classes, desperate to find a quiet place to study. Every cafe in town was overflowing with people hiding from the storm, and I was about to give up when I saw it. On the corner of Fifth Street stood a small brick building I had never paid much attention to before. A library. Nothing unusual about that, except for the glowing neon sign above the door that read, "Open 24/7. I stopped dead in my tracks. A library that never closed? In a town where even the gas stations shut down at midnight? It didn't make sense. I had lived here for years, yet I had never seen anyone walk in or out of this place. Still, the lights were on. My curiosity got the better of me. The moment I stepped inside, a wave of warmth and the faint smell of old paper hit me. Rows upon rows of wooden bookshelves stretched deep into the building. But what caught my attention immediately wasn't the size. It was the people. Dozens of them sat perfectly still at the long oak tables. Men, women, even teenagers, all reading books silently. But there was something strange. They didn't turn the pages often. Some sat staring at the exact same page for minutes, eyes completely unblinking. A tall woman with sharp gray eyes approached me. She wore a neat black cardigan and a silver necklace shaped like a key. Her smile felt knowing, almost rehearsed. "First time here?" she asked softly. Before I could answer, she handed me a heavy leather-bound book with no title on the cover. The pages looked yellowed, but the ink inside was fresh, almost wet. "You want to start with this one?" she said. I sat at one of the empty tables and opened it. My heart skipped. These weren't normal stories. They weren't fairy tales or history lessons. They were records. Real-time events, written word by word as they happened in the world. I saw an entry about a robbery downtown, then a marriage proposal at a restaurant, then an argument between a father and son. And then my stomach dropped. The page in front of me described me, word for word. At 9:42 p.m., a young man entered the library. He hesitated by the door, adjusting the strap of his backpack, before being greeted by the librarian. He sits now at the far right table, reading these very words. My hands trembled. The book was still writing itself, describing my every move as I turned the pages. I looked up, and suddenly I noticed it. Every single person in the room had one of these books. And they weren't just reading. They were watching me. Dozens of eyes, all at once, lifted from their pages and locked onto mine. The librarian leaned down, her whisper brushing against my ear. "Now you understand. This library does not record the past. It records the present. And once you've read your own page, you are bound to stay." Next story. Story 2. The Mirror in the Attic. When my grandmother passed away, the family house became mine. It was an old Victorian-style home, filled with creaky stairs, narrow hallways, and rooms that seemed to carry the weight of centuries. I spent the first few weeks cleaning, sorting through her belongings, and trying to make it feel like my own. One stormy evening, the power flickered out, and I decided to grab a flashlight to explore the attic. I had avoided it before. Something about it always felt unsettling. The wooden ladder groaned as I climbed, dust falling in little clouds with each step. The attic was exactly what you'd expect. Boxes stacked high, old trunks, cobwebs in the corners. But at the far end of the room, half hidden beneath a moth-eaten sheet, stood something that caught my attention, a tall, ornate mirror. Its golden frame was covered with carved roses and vines, though most of the paint had chipped away. I pulled the sheet off, and the mirror seemed almost alive in the dim glow of my flashlight. The glass was spotless, far too clean compared to the dusty attic around it. For a moment, I stared at my reflection, messy hair, tired eyes, flashlight in hand. Normal. But then I noticed something that made my skin crawl. In the reflection, behind me, the attic looked different, cleaner, brighter. The boxes and trunks were gone. Instead, I could see furniture arranged neatly, as if the attic was a lived-in room. And then someone moved. A woman in an old-fashioned dress appeared behind me, in the mirror. Her face was pale, her expression unreadable, and yet she wasn't in the real attic. Only in the reflection. I spun around, shining the flashlight wildly. Nothing. Just dusty boxes and silence. My heart hammered as I looked back at the mirror. She was still there, standing closer this time, her hand reaching out toward the glass. Every instinct screamed at me to cover the mirror again, but I couldn't move. It was as if the reflection itself was pulling me in, daring me to step closer. Then I noticed something terrifying. My reflection hadn't moved when I did. I had turned my head, but in the mirror, my face was still staring straight ahead, frozen. And slowly, a smile spread across the lips of the me inside the glass. That was the moment I bolted. I yanked the sheet back over the mirror and stumbled down the ladder, nearly breaking my ankle. The next morning, I told myself it had been my imagination, maybe a trick of the light. But later, when I went back up to check, the mirror was bare. No dust, no sheet, no sign of it at all. Just an empty patch of floor where it had been. My grandmother never mentioned anything about a mirror in her attic. And yet, I can't shake the feeling that it's not gone. It's just waiting. Next story 3, the vanishing train. It was late at night when I boarded the small regional train. Only a handful of passengers were inside. An old man dozing with his hat pulled over his face, a young couple whispering quietly, and a woman knitting by the window. The train rattled along the tracks, cutting through fields and forests. At first, everything seemed ordinary. I sat back, listening to the steady rhythm of the wheels. But then, something strange happened. The lights inside flickered just for a moment. When they steadied again, I noticed that the world outside the window looked wrong. Instead of moonlit fields, there were endless stretches of dark water, black and still, as if the train was moving across a lake. Mist pressed against the glass, curling like smoke. I turned to the other passengers, expecting someone else to react, but they hadn't noticed. The old man still slept, the couple still whispered, the woman kept knitting. Everything seemed the same, except for what I saw outside. The train slowed. A station appeared out of the fog, but it wasn't any station I recognized. The platform was cracked and overgrown with weeds. The old wooden sign was so weathered the letters were unreadable. And yet, dozens of people stood waiting. They weren't like normal passengers. Their clothes were old-fashioned, tattered, and dripping wet, as if they had climbed straight out of a river. Their pale faces turned toward the train in unison. The doors opened with a hiss. None of the passengers around me moved, as though they couldn't see what was happening. But the crowd outside began to climb aboard, silent, water dripping onto the floor. One of them passed me in the aisle. His eyes were empty, but his lips moved, forming words I couldn't hear. He sat down across from me, staring as though he knew me. I wanted to run, but there was nowhere to go. The train started moving again, this time faster, the mist outside swirling like a storm. My heart pounded as I realized we weren't on normal tracks anymore. I leaned closer to the window. The reflection of the train didn't match the inside. In the glass, the old man, the couple, and the knitting woman were gone. In their place sat more of the dripping figures, row after row, staring blankly forward. I looked back in shock, and now the seats around me were filling with them too. One by one, they replaced the living passengers until I was the only one left. The man across from me leaned forward, his wet hand reaching for mine. This time, I heard his whisper, "You shouldn't be here." The train plunged into darkness, and when the lights flickered back, I was sitting alone. No pasajeros. No conductor. Just me. The train slowed again, stopping at a familiar station. My station. I stumbled out onto the platform, gasping for air. Behind me, the doors shut, and the train pulled away into the night. When I turned to watch it, there was nothing there. No lights, no sound. Just empty tracks stretching into the mist. I never found any record of that train, or that station with the crowd waiting in the fog. But sometimes when I walk by the tracks at night, I swear I can hear the faint rattle of wheels and the sound of dripping water. Next story. Story 4. The phone call at midnight. It was just after midnight when my phone rang. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Who calls at that hour? The screen showed unknown number. I hesitated, but something compelled me to answer. "Hello," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, faintly, I heard breathing on the other end. Slow, uneven, as though the caller was standing very close, listening. "Who is this?" I asked, trying to sound firm. The breathing stopped. Then, in a low, distorted voice, the caller said, "Don't go to sleep." My heart skipped. Before I could respond, the line went dead. I sat there in the dark, staring at my phone. Maybe it was a prank. But then the phone rang again. Same number. Same time on the clock, 12:04 a.m. This time, I let it go to voicemail. A moment later, the notification popped up. Against my better judgment, I pressed play. The message was just static until I heard it. My own voice. Whispering. "I can see you." Chills ran down my spine. That wasn't possible. I hadn't said those words. I locked my doors, checked my windows, and tried to convince myself it was a trick. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. At exactly 1 a.m., the phone rang again. Trembling, I answered. On the other end, I heard children laughing. Soft, echoing giggles, like they were coming from a long hallway. Then, the same distorted voice spoke once more. "They're already inside." I dropped the phone, my hands shaking. My eyes darted to the corners of my room. Nothing. Silence. But then, faintly, I heard footsteps upstairs. The strange thing? I live alone. I rushed to grab something to defend myself. But as I reached the living room, the phone rang again. Against all reason, I picked it up. This time, there was no breathing, no laughter. Just silence. Then, very quietly, I heard, "Open the door." But the phone wasn't pressed to my ear anymore. The voice was coming from right outside. Next story 5. The attic light. It started with something simple. A faint glow. Every night, around 2 a.m., a light would flicker on in our attic. It wasn't bright, just enough to shine faintly through the cracks in the ceiling boards. At first, I thought my parents had left some old bulb connected to a timer. But here's the problem. Our attic doesn't have electricity. The first night, I brushed it off. The second night, I stayed awake to see it for myself. Sure enough, as the clock hit 2 o'clock, the light appeared. Faint, pulsing, almost like candlelight. I convinced myself it had to be headlights from the road or maybe a neighbor's lamp. But when I climbed up the ladder to check, the moment I touched the attic door, the glow vanished. The attic was pitch black, and the air was ice cold. On the third night, I decided to leave my phone recording. When I checked the footage in the morning, my stomach dropped. For the first 2 hours, it was normal. Then, at exactly 2 o'clock, the video showed the attic door trembling. A dim light leaked through the cracks. And then, a shadow moved. It wasn't human. The shape was tall, crooked, its limbs too long. For nearly 10 minutes, the shadow paced back and forth, as if waiting for something. I showed the video to my parents. They laughed it off, saying I'd edited it to scare them. So I set up a live stream for the fourth night, determined to prove it. That night, hundreds of people tuned in. As the clock struck 2 o'clock, the chat exploded. The light was there, everyone saw it. And then, the attic door slowly creaked open on its own. Viewers typed frantically in the chat. "Don't go up there. Run. Call the police." But I couldn't move. My body froze. From the darkness of the attic, something leaned forward. Not fully visible, just enough for me to see glowing eyes staring directly into the camera. And then the stream cut to black. When I woke up the next morning, the attic door was shut tight. My phone was on the floor, the recording erased. But every night since then, at exactly 2 a.m., the light comes back. And now, sometimes, I hear footsteps coming down the attic ladder. Next story. Story 6. The Whispering Neighbor. When I first moved into my new apartment, everything seemed perfect. The rent was affordable, the building was quiet, and the walls were freshly painted. But within the first week, I noticed something strange. Every night, just after midnight, I could hear a faint whisper through the wall behind my bed. At first, I thought it was just the neighbors talking too loudly. But the voice wasn't muffled the way normal voices are through walls. It was clear, almost as if someone was speaking directly into my ear. The first night I heard it, I couldn't make out the words. The second night, it became clearer. A man's voice, low and raspy, repeating the same thing. I see you. I sat up in bed, my heart racing. The apartment next to mine was supposed to be empty. The landlord had mentioned the last tenant moved out months ago, and the unit was waiting for renovation. I tried to brush it off, but the whispers came back every night. Sometimes they changed. Soft laughter, someone humming a tune, or even what sounded like scratching against the wall. One night, I recorded the sound on my phone. When I played it back, the whisper was louder than I remembered. It said my name. By the second week, I couldn't sleep. I asked the landlord if maybe someone had broken into the empty unit. He swore it was locked, and even gave me the keys to check it out myself. That evening, just before midnight, I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The air was stale, heavy with dust. The place was completely empty. No furniture, no lights, no signs of life. Still, I waited. At exactly midnight, the whispers started again. But this time, they weren't behind the wall. They were in the room with me. The voice was louder now, circling me, though I saw nothing. I ran out, slammed the door shut, and barely made it back to my apartment. Since then, the whispers haven't stopped. Sometimes they come from the walls. Other times, I hear them right next to my bed. And last night, for the first time, I felt warm breath on my ear as the voice whispered, "I'm not in the walls anymore. I'm in your apartment." Next story, Story 7, The Hidden Letter. It began when my grandfather passed away. While helping my family clean out his old study, I noticed something strange about his massive oak desk. One drawer was slightly smaller than the others, and when I tapped on the bottom, it sounded hollow. Curiosity got the better of me. I took a screwdriver and carefully pried the wood loose. Inside, hidden between two panels, was a yellowed envelope with my name on it. The handwriting was my grandfather's. My hands trembled as I opened it. The letter wasn't long, but it was chilling. He wrote that if I ever found this, it meant he hadn't been able to finish what he started. He warned me never to go into the attic alone after midnight, and if I ever heard knocking in threes, I should never respond. I thought it was some kind of dark family joke. My grandfather always loved horror novels, so maybe he was trying to leave me with one last scare. I laughed it off at first. That night, as I lay in bed, I heard it. 3 knocks. Slow, deliberate, coming from a ceiling above me. I froze. My grandfather's warning echoed in my mind. I told myself it had to be the house settling, or maybe a tree branch against the roof. But then the knocks came again. 3 times. Louder. I didn't sleep that night. The next evening, I told my parents about the letter. They exchanged nervous glances but brushed it off, saying I must have misunderstood. But I could tell they knew something. So, on the 3rd night, I made the mistake of going into the attic at 12:05 a.m. It was freezing. My flashlight flickered as I scanned the dusty boxes. At first, nothing seemed unusual. But then, I noticed footprints in the dust. Fresh ones, leading to the far corner of the attic where an old wardrobe stood. The knocking started again. 3 times. This time, it came from inside the wardrobe. I ran. I haven't opened the attic since. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear the knocks. And I know whatever secret my grandfather carried to his grave, it didn't stay buried. Next story. Story 8. The Babysitter's Midnight Call. When I was in high school, I used to babysit for extra money. One Friday night, a family hired me to watch their 2 kids while they went to dinner. They lived in a quiet neighborhood, nothing unusual. At least that's what I thought. The night started out normal. We played board games, had snacks, and I put the kids to bed around 9 p.m. I sat in the living room, scrolling through my phone when the house phone rang. I almost didn't answer, but something about the shrill ring in that empty house made me pick up. A man's voice whispered, "Check the children." Then the line went dead. My stomach dropped. At first, I thought it was a prank, maybe one of my friends messing with me. I shook it off and tried to focus on my phone. But 15 minutes later, the phone rang again. Same number, same voice. This time, it said, "Don't ignore me. Check the children." My heart raced. I went upstairs, pushed open the kids' bedroom door, and they were both fast asleep. I told myself I was just being paranoid. Back downstairs, I tried watching TV to distract myself. Then the phone rang a third time. This time, the voice wasn't whispering. It was angry. "Why haven't you checked the children?" I slammed the phone down and immediately called the restaurant where the parents were. They told me to stay calm and promised to head back right away. Just then, the phone rang again. I didn't answer, but it kept ringing, over and over. The sound filled the house like an alarm. Finally, I grabbed the receiver and screamed, "What do you want from me?" The voice on the other end said, almost laughing, "I already told you. I'm inside the house." I dropped the phone and ran to the kids' room. I locked the door, pushed furniture against it, and called the police. When they arrived, they searched the house. Hidden in the upstairs closet, they found a man with a knife. He had been sneaking around the entire time I was there. The family moved a few months later. I never babysat again. Next story. Story 9. The apartment above mine expanded. I had just moved into a small apartment in the city. It was cheap, cozy, and in a decent neighborhood, perfect for someone starting a new chapter in life. The building itself was older, but it had character, creaky wooden floors, tall windows, and a little balcony that overlooked a quiet street. The only odd thing was the apartment above mine. Almost immediately, I could hear footsteps at all hours, even when no one should be home. At first, I dismissed it as typical old building noises, pipes, settling wood, maybe a cat running across the floors. But soon, the sounds grew stranger. I began to hear muffled talking late at night, low humming that seemed to come from nowhere, and sometimes soft cries that made my heart race. It happened almost every night, growing more frequent as the week passed. One evening, curiosity and unease got the better of me. I grabbed my coat and knocked on my neighbor's door. No answer. I knocked again, harder. Still nothing. Feeling frustrated, I even left a note asking them to contact me. Nothing. My imagination began to run wild. Maybe someone was hiding inside, or was it something paranormal? A week later, the noises escalated. I could hear dragging sounds, as if something heavy was being pulled across the floor. I tried to rationalize it, perhaps renovations, but the sounds didn't match normal construction. They were deliberate and irregular. Then came the night I'll never forget. I was asleep when I woke to a scream. Not a scream of fear, but of agony, raw and terrifying. It came from directly above my bedroom. My heart pounded in my chest. I could feel the vibrations through the floor. I called the police immediately. They arrived quickly, but their news chilled me to the bone. The apartment above mine was completely empty, vacant for months. They checked the building's records and confirmed it. I wanted to argue, to tell them what I'd heard, but they shook their heads and said that sometimes old buildings play tricks on the mind. Terrified and shaken, I packed my things and moved out the next day. But before I left, I felt a need to see it one last time. I peeked inside the ceiling vent in my bedroom, just for a quick glance. Inside, written in smeared, dark letters, were the words, "You can hear me now." After that, I never stayed in an apartment alone again, and I always triple-checked building records before moving in. Next story, story 10. The locked drawer expanded. When I was a teenager, I lived with my grandparents in an old house that had been in our family for generations. The house was large, with creaking floors, tall wooden ceilings, and a maze of narrow hallways. It smelled of cedar and old books. My grandparents filled it with antiques, old furniture, and trinkets from the past. One afternoon, while cleaning the dusty attic with a flashlight and a broom, I discovered an old wooden desk tucked in the far corner under a tarp. The desk was ornate, covered in dust and cobwebs. What caught my eye was a small drawer with a rusty lock, unlike anything else in the house. Curious, I went downstairs and asked my grandmother about it. Her face froze instantly. She stared at me with a strange mixture of fear and sadness. After a long pause, she said, "That drawer should never be opened. Promise me you won't touch it." That night, the words haunted me. Curiosity got the better of me. I sneaked into the attic with a hairpin and, after struggling for nearly half an hour, managed to pick the lock. The drawer creaked open slowly, releasing a faint scent of old paper and metal. Inside was a bundle of yellowed letters tied with a faded ribbon and an old tarnished pocket watch with intricate engravings. The letters were addressed to someone named Eleanor and dated back to the early 1900s. The handwriting was beautiful but eerie, flowing script filled with longing, secrets, and strange warnings. One letter read, "Do not trust the shadows in the attic. They remember." The pocket watch had an engraving on its back. Time never forgets. Holding it sent a chill through me. From that night on, strange things began happening. I started hearing noises in the attic, slow footsteps, whispers I couldn't make out, and the faint ticking of a clock, even when there was no clock nearby. Shadows seemed to linger longer than normal, and a cold presence seemed to follow me in the house. One evening, determined to end the unease, I climbed up to the attic to return the letters and lock the drawer again. As I approached, the temperature dropped sharply. The air felt heavy and thick. I heard a faint whisper, almost like a voice brushing past my ear. "You shouldn't have opened it." Suddenly, the drawer slammed shut on its own. My heart pounded. I ran downstairs and never went back to the attic again. Even years later, whenever I walk past that desk, I swear I hear faint ticking, slow, steady, and chilling. I still wonder what secrets Eleanor's letters contained, and whether I truly unlocked something that should have stayed locked forever.